Hi, my name is Trevor Hughes, and I'm here today to talk to you about reality TV. So I'm sure that none of you are strangers to reality TV, but let's face it, no one is a stranger to reality TV, and I think that that really says something. And as of 2015, roughly 60% of television is reality TV. 60% is a lot, especially in today's society, and 60% represents the majority of television on air. So while a lot of people underestimate the growing popularity of reality TV, I think with this large of a following, its influence should definitely not be going unnoticed. And so my study more accurately describes the interaction between reality TV and aggression. So the research question for my study was, to what extent does reality television have a measurable impact on the implicit aggression of adolescents? And for clarification, by implicit aggression, I mean aggressive thoughts rather than aggressive actions. So it's more what's going on in them cognitively rather than if they're acting on it. And then adolescents, I mean teens aged 14 to 18. So when I started my project, I looked at popularity. I looked at popularity. As a high schooler, it should come as no surprise that I'm a high schooler, I'm faced with this social hierarchy and structure almost every day. And so I noticed an archetype that I found. I noticed that there's someone at the top, and they say mean, disparaging comments. In other words, they act aggressively, and yet they manage to maintain their top status and keep everyone else below them. And I was going, well, okay, first of all, this does not seem to be limited to just my high school. This seems almost universal in a sense. And that's because I quickly realized that this is present in almost every television series or movie about high school ever created. And so this kind of gave me an inkling that possibly this behavior could have been learned through the television media. But I wasn't sure about that just yet, so I had to do some more exploration. I had to look at why that behavior, why this archetype was happening. And so the first answer to that was reinforcement. Like any behavior, it has to be reinforced. And that was relatively simple, but this is where it gets kind of interesting. By whom? And some people will argue that it's all of us. And they'll say that by not responding and acting up and rebelling against these aggressive behaviors, we're just letting them steamroll over us. We're letting them control us. But because I noticed that it was present on television, I thought something different. I thought, what if it's being reinforced by the screen? What if the television medium is reinforcing this idea of aggression as the top and aggressive as the popular? And so with that, I had to look at psychological concepts to see if that was even possible. So I looked at Albert Bandura, and I looked at this concept of modeling. It's a basic foundational psychological concept, and it says that we learn by observing and then subsequently imitating a specific behavior. A really quick example of this is when a child is learning how to drive and they're able to insert the key and start the car on their first try. They never learned. They never had to learn and be told to do that. They just knew how to do it because they'd seen someone do it so many times. So I looked at that. And then I had to look at if this was applicable on the reality TV spectrum. And so I looked at hyperreality, which was developed by Neil Say. And hyperreality is this idea of the inability of consciousness to discriminate between your reality and the reality you're watching on the screen. In a sense of blending of fact and fiction, right? And so I'm looking at this concept of hyperreality, and in my head I'm thinking, oh, possibly reality TV could have more of an impact on this because it's supposed to be real. And so I kind of used that as a foundational concept, but again, I still needed to be sure that this could have been replicated. So I looked at something called the violence moving effect study. This has been done many, many, many times. I looked at the one by Edward Donnerstein at the University of Michigan, but you can look at tons. And so basically they use this idea of a pre-test stimulus, post-test with a control group and a stimulus group, and they saw how children reacted to violent TV. It was a fictionally made, pre-made television program, but they found that students who were exposed to the violent stimulus more often were more violent. And so to me, I used aggression as my trait, but there's also something else interesting that I found here. While they did this as a cross-sectional study, actually a longitudinal study over many years, they found that as the years increased, the violent behavior increased. And so I'm kind of wondering, in the realm of television, what could possibly account for this increase in violent behavior? And so with that in mind, I looked at reality TV. Now, reality TV hit the spectrum in 2000. It was a boom. It was popular. And there were three main reasons for that. One, it was cheap. It's really easy to set up cameras and just film people. Two, it's new. And three, and most importantly, there's this idea of open testimony. Reality TV is said to be unscripted. It's said to have natural inclinations and natural ideas. And so because of that, people are anticipating what's going to happen. They're anticipating the discussion that's going to ensue. And so that makes it really appealing. But let's look at an example for a sec. Let's look at Survivor. 20 castaways on an island. That's awesome, that's great. Watching people on an island is really interesting for the first 3 episodes, and then it becomes really boring. And so then how do we make it popular? How do we increase popularity? Well, we know that because we know that popularity is being aggressive. So they need to provide conflict. They need to create this sense of conflict in reality TV in order to promote the aggressive behavior. And for myself, this made reality television, this secured it, as the perfect medium to use for my study, because it's the perfect emulator of aggressive television. So there was one assumption I made based on this. I assumed that the aggressive images present in reality TV cause the aggressive acts in real life through modeling, and then we can reinforce these aggressive acts in 2 ways. One, like people are saying, we don't really necessarily act on them, but additionally, we're watching these programs and encouraging them to continue. And so that's another way we're reinforcing it. So another major thing was Kim Kardashian. I know it seems odd, but I'm telling you that people on reality TV, unlike the characters and actors who are on once a week in their Thursday slot, they're posting to Instagram, they're posting to social media, they're in magazine ads. And so doing this, it makes it almost more possibility, more of a chance that you can emulate this behavior. And then in addition, there's this idea that they're in your real world, they're invading your own real life. So I thought that reality TV could create an even greater sense of hyper-reality than other programming. That's why I used it. So let's talk about limitations really quick. So the limitations of my study were obviously it was conducted at an inner city select enrollment high school. And so with that idea, there are students of a higher academic caliber, and studies have shown that people with a higher education level don't really watch reality TV as much, so that possibly could have influenced the data. Additionally, I only measured implicit aggression. I only measured aggressive thoughts. I didn't measure if they actually acted on them. So if you were using my data to see, predict if people were going to do violent behavior or something like that, it wouldn't really be accurate because people have a filter and they prevent that. Then let's talk about delimitations. I focused on adolescents age 14 to 18. I don't know if this happens to children. I don't know if this happens to adults. Secondly, I focused on aggression. I don't know about happiness, sadness, funniness, anything like that. And third of all, I only focused on reality television. As I mentioned before, I don't know about fictional television. That'd be an interesting call for further research. If I had more time, I'd probably investigate that. The moment you've been waiting for, the A factor, the title of my presentation. So the A factor is, for my study, within each individual, the percentage of aggression resulting from reality TV exposure. So what I mean by this is, when everyone's born, they have an inborn tendency of aggression. Their temperament is set. So they're going to have a certain aggression level they have. But I'm only looking at the aggression level that they had influenced by their environment. In this case, reality TV specifically. So the A factor is their aggression after controlling for biological differences. So my hypothesis that formed my method was that increased exposure to reality television will result in a higher level of implicit aggression in my participants. And that was based on the concept of modeling, and that reality TV is super saturated in aggression, so just more exposure would transmit that aggression better. So the method I used was a quantitative and coded approach. This was actually inspired by 2 different sources. One was the idea of the implicit association test by Harvard. There actually is no implicit association test for aggression, mind you, so I had to create my own test to kind of work around that. But this idea that you can measure emotions quantitatively was really important to me, so I tried to look at that. And then I tried to code that data that I saw. And then additionally, I used it because in the violence viewing effect study, they used a pre-test stimulus post-test idea, and they tried to code their data as well, so that's why I stuck to that. So my study needed 3 things. It needed teenagers, it needed tests, and it needed reality TV. So those are the 3 things that you will be seeing in my study. So phase 1 of my study was a web-based survey. I asked students a variety of background questions, but then I also asked them the amount of hours of general television they watched and the amount of hours of reality television they watched, both in school and during breaks, to get a sense of how much they're watching. And then phase 2 was a stimulus-based experiment with a control group and a stimulus group, the control group watching less than a half an hour of reality TV per week on average, and the stimulus group watching roughly an hour or more of reality TV. And there was a gap there because I thought that that group might be a little bit faulty. And so then additionally, it should be noted that I used random and purposeful sampling in my study. And so what I mean by that is for phase 1, my participants were chosen at random. I had their student number in the high school, and I looked and I compared that and I saw, oh, 123, that's Bob A, and 430 is Bob B, and etc. And that's very simple to understand. And then for purposeful sampling, I use that in my transition from phase 1 to phase 2. And I tried to use that to get a globally representative sample because my population was getting smaller. I wanted my findings to still be able to be replicated on a large scale. This data was obtained by Dr. Susan Cross, who wrote an article in the New York Times concerning the who watches reality TV, and so I used that data. Her findings actually were really not that meaningful in terms of ethnicity and age, but she did find a 71-29 gender split, girl-boy, so that was interesting, and I did have to factor that into my study. So for phase 2, I had a fragmentation task that I used as my pre-test. The stimulus was a compilation of reality television. It was roughly 10 minutes. And then my image task was the post-aggression stimulus. And the fragmentation task controlled for initial/overall aggression. So it controlled for their aggression just inherently when they walked in the room. And then their immediate aggression was controlled by the image task. So I gave them reality TV and I saw their susceptibility to resort to aggressive tendencies. In other words, this was what I used to factor for their biological differences. And so these are the two values that I used in calculating my A factor. So the fragmentation task, just for reference, because I think it is important to see it, I would give them something like this. There were actually 75 of them, 20 were coded as aggressive. And then there's multiple ways you can fill this in. And they can vote it in as explore or explode. Explode would be the aggressive word. There were 75 of them, 20 of them were coded, and they had 8 minutes to complete the task. And then the image task, this is just a really quick sample. I actually used 25 images. Here's a sample of 5. They could choose 10 images from the 25. 10 images were selected as aggressive images, 15 images were selected as neutral, and just for reference, the ones with the red triangle were the aggressive images, the ones with green were neutral, so there's a variance. It's not like they're all one type of image. So this was an interesting finding I discovered at my high school. The hours of television just watched. So before we get into data, so 0% of my high schoolers watched no general television. So they all watched some television, but 39.5% of them watched no reality television. That's shocking. And the fact that that exists might suggest the fact that a limitation of my study was that it has that higher academic caliber, and they're slightly turned off by the dramatic nature of reality TV, is what I speculate. Again, further research should be done to confirm that. So that was an interesting finding, but I think it also points to the fact that those characters on reality TV are in your real life, and I think that that shows their ability to still control people. So some of my findings were my fragmentation task for my control group and my stimulus group that measured initial overall aggression was a positive correlation, meaning people that watched more reality TV had more initial overall scores. And then again, for the immediate aggression, I also found a positive correlation, which means that the people who were exposed to the stimulus had roughly 3 points out of 10 higher than the people who were not exposed to the stimulus. So that means that it did have an effect. And this is a chart that compares the A factor of each participant, which is within each individual their aggression resulting from reality TV, with the hours of reality television watched, and we see that it's a positive correlation. So it shows that reality television did have an impact in increasing aggression. My hypothesis was, again, that increased exposure to reality TV results in higher levels of overall aggression, and my hypothesis was supported by the data, and that's for 3 reasons. 1, more reality TV, the higher percentage of attributable aggression, the A factor. 2, more short-term exposure to reality TV results in higher levels of aggression. And then 3, people watching more overall reality TV were initially more aggressive. Popularity. This all relates back, I promise. So we're going back now with this concept that reality TV facilitates aggression and that people that are popular use aggression. And so we're going to look at this on a very large scale. So this is a graph of the people who watched Mythbusters in the United States of 2015. Notice the lack of concentration in the South. That will become important in a little bit. And notice the kind of concentration over here. And Mythbusters is a show where people do experiments and they test them out, so it's a very academic show. It's normally known in the reality TV community to be less aggressive in nature. And this is the graph of people who watch Duck Dynasty in the United States. And notice the concentration right here in the South. And so right here is the 2016 election map. And so what I'm saying is that people who were more exposed to Duck Dynasty, which is known to be a more aggressive show, were more likely to vote for a candidate that was arguably very aggressive and used aggressive means to transmit his point. And so that shows that, this is obviously a correlation, it does not prove causation, but it shows that the reality TV you watch matters and it affects your behavior, and then it can affect the actions that you take to transmit that. And that's especially relevant in a culture such as the United States, which is entertainment dominated. We're all about who's the most popular. And so knowing that the aggressive people rise to the top we can be cognizantly aware of that and try to combat that. And so we need to think about how this is affecting us politically, how this is affecting the political people we're electing, how is this affecting us socially with our friend groups, are we being controlled by people that are more aggressive, how is this affecting us mentally and our cognitive thoughts, and then how can we prevent this? How can we focus on using more hopeful and optimistic means rather than aggression to maintain popularity and select people that will represent us? Because as we've seen in the past, aggression is not a good way to rule, it's not really a sustainable strategy. And so with that, thank you very much.
Can I ask you some questions now?
Okay. What was one obstacle or challenge you encountered while performing the research, and how did you address it?
Yeah, so a big obstacle I encountered in the research process was when I originally started off this project, I actually wanted to evaluate reality TV from 3 different angles. I wanted to evaluate them by situational reality TV shows, talent reality TV shows, and contest reality TV shows. And what I mean by that, I'm just going to give you a really quick example. Situational would be like Keeping Up with the Kardashians, talent would be American Idol, and contest would be Survivor. Obviously, there's some slight overlap in that, but I thought that by doing that, I would be able to get a more accurate measure of what reality TV shows were contributing to the certain effect. But I realized that if I'm exposing them to a stimulus, I can't have one stimulus be talent, and one stimulus be contest, and one stimulus be situational, because that would result in data that's totally skewed, because each program is going to be indifferent in their aggression levels. So while I definitely did want to investigate that, I had to cut that out and then kind of work around that, and I tried to splice together situational talent and contest, but I just couldn't do one of each, because that would not be effective.
All right, I'm going to ask you a 2-part question. What additional questions emerged during your research? And based on those, what advice would you give to other researchers who might choose to investigate them?
Yeah, for sure. So kind of one additional question, which is actually really funny because I just mentioned it, was what kind of shows are contributing more to this level of aggression? Is it situational, like I would suspect, or is it going to be other shows? Another additional question that kind of emerged would be comparing reality television to fictional television and seeing if reality television really is more impactful on behavior because it has this perception of being real and because the people that you're seeing on reality TV are present in your real life. So that would definitely be an additional question I would ask. For people who want to pursue those questions, I would advise that they achieve, first of all, a larger overall sample because I do not think that my data being from one specific high school was globally representative, and I think that that should definitely be changed. I would also advise them to do more practice and find out what reality TV shows are, and have a better method of determining what reality TV shows you're going to use. Look at Nielsen ratings, see what's most popular, and see what people are responding to in normal life before you start to use it and emulate it in your study. Those would be my 2 big pieces of advice for people who want.
Think about the initial curiosity that led to your inquiry. What other areas of inquiry might that same curiosity lead to?
Yes. Thank you. As I mentioned, my initial curiosity was popularity. And popularity is extremely pertinent in today's society because today's society is all about perception. And so I think that the additional kind of inquiries that will result from that would be, how does, specifically in my field actually, how does attractiveness affect the transmittance of behavior? Are people that are more attractive on reality TV possibly perceived more positively and then have their behavior emulated more because people are more likely to want to emulate them? An additional idea that can result from the idea of popularity is comparing cultures and how they differ in their popularity. The US, as I mentioned, is entertainment-centric and focuses on aggression. Maybe cultures that are more socialist in nature would focus more on community and people that are more passive. And additional research could definitely be done in their television means in that area too.
Thank you.
Thank you.